Marvin Gets on the Air. Episode 3, Copper Pipes, an audible story about real events and real people. By Brad Tuttle. AI assisted by ChatGPT and ElevenLabs. It is the nature of boys and men to one up. That is, they start with something reasonable and then start moving up. That is why any sport, any motorized object, any dare, anything male starts out small and slow, but eventually grows to gargantuan proportions and crazy dangerous fast. Radio is no exception.
Marvin started small, a $10 scanner bought secondhand with a paperclip for an antenna. Then came a handheld GMRS radio with a rubber ducky. But very soon he wanted to extend the range of his GMRS radio. It didn't matter that Earl only lived in the apartment a few feet away. One-upping does not depend on logic. It is pure male emotion. It is a universal gene on the Y chromosome. There were repeaters and possibilities galore just beyond Marvin's limited range. For days and weeks, he considered various radio alternatives and power options. But everything kept coming back to one thing: the antenna. That realization opened an entirely new rabbit hole. Marvin's apartment gradually transformed into what could best be described as an antenna research center, although a less charitable observer might have called it a less than adequately organized mess. Spiral notebooks lay open on the kitchen table. Yellow legal pads covered the sofa cushions. Small slips of paper protruded from the notebooks like colorful porcupine quills. Notebooks contained calculations, sketches, formulas, questions, and conclusions. The internet discussions and videos did little to simplify matters. Every expert appeared completely confident that their antenna was king. One enthusiast declared the simple dipole to be the greatest antenna ever devised. Another dismissed the dipole as outdated and insisted everyone should build a vertical. The next presenter demonstrated a J-pole, consisting of 12 AWG wire hidden inside a length of PVC pipe. Several hams proudly showed their do-it-yourself antennas constructed from shiny copper tubing. Others proudly transmitted through their aluminum rain gutters, attached to their house or garage. That's one way to get around radio-unfriendly HOA restrictions. Marvin and Earl scheduled every night as YouTube night, and together over the period of about 3 weeks, they watched every antenna video that existed. Soon, the apartment echoed with phrases like low angle of radiation, standing wave ratio, feed point impedance, and decibel gain. Marvin copied unfamiliar expressions into his notebook for later study. Before long, he had accumulated enough information to confuse 3 electrical engineers, while simultaneously convincing himself that every design possessed at least one remarkable advantage. The dipole appealed to his sense of simplicity, but the tape measure antenna appealed to his sense of practicality and creativity. There was something deeply satisfying about turning an ordinary carpenter's tool into a communication device. Marvin admired ideas that gave common objects uncommon purposes. The rain gutter antenna fascinated him for entirely different reasons. After all, the Shady Rest apartment manager was a very bossy lady, to the point that stealth in an antenna could be an extremely desired quality. That afternoon, he went outside and carefully measured the apartment building's guttering. He worked slowly, occasionally stepping backward to improve his perspective. A passing tenant watched him study the downspout and roof line with the seriousness usually reserved for surveying land or inspecting a bridge. The tenant continued walking without asking questions. Experience had taught most of Marvin's neighbors that explanations often required considerably more time than they had available. The wire J-pole hidden inside PVC pipe antenna seemed almost elegant. Protected from the weather, inexpensive, lightweight, and nearly invisible, it represented practical engineering at its finest. Marvin admired the ingenuity of concealing something useful inside something ordinary. Still, one design kept drawing him back: the copper J-pole. Its polished copper tubing possessed an old-fashioned honesty. Every piece served an obvious purpose. Nothing was hidden. It looked less like a homemade project and more like a carefully crafted scientific instrument. The more Marvin watched demonstrations of copper J-poles, the more convinced he became that this was not merely an antenna, but a piece of proven functional paraphernalia. By the end, they had watched the same 12 J-pole construction videos 4 separate times each. By breakfast the following morning, Marvin had made his decision. The copper J-pole had won. Earl said that he had figured that out days ago. The next task involved gathering supplies. Marvin prepared a shopping list with the same care other people devoted to drafting their will. Every fitting appeared on the list by name, size, and quantity. Every item received its own neatly printed line. Earl quietly charged his scooter's battery, while Marvin checked the list 3 times. That, of course, required him to rewatch several of the more informative videos. The hardware store lay only a comfortable mobility scooter ride away, using the paved jogging trail connecting the apartment complex to the shopping center. The route wound through small patches of trees, crossed a shallow creek, and eventually emerged beside the familiar red and white Ace Hardware sign. It promised to be a pleasant journey, and for the first half-mile, it was exactly that. Morning joggers passed in both directions. Cyclists called cheerful warnings before overtaking them. Dog walkers exchanged friendly greetings. Birds darted between branches overhead, while squirrels pursued business that seemed urgent only to squirrels. Unfortunately, several of the dogs had apparently paused for reasons unrelated to exercise. Earl discovered one such location with his right side scooter wheels, simultaneously. Neither Marvin nor Earl noticed immediately. The evidence became unmistakable just a few tire revolutions later. What followed resembled less a pleasant morning ride than a desperate attempt to remove the unwanted material. Earl drove onto the grass, back onto the pavement, across loose gravel, into another grassy patch. He attempted gentle figure eights, then wider circles, and then reverse. Nothing produced satisfactory results. Marvin resorted to a sturdy stick, which proved useful for only a few moments, before surrendering completely to the assignment. By the time the tires finally rolled clean again, Earl felt unusually exhausted despite traveling less than 2 miles. The automatic doors of the hardware store opened with their familiar whisper. Standing a short distance inside was Clarence. Clarence was a career man who possessed an extraordinary understanding of hardware stores. He knew where every item lived, which products had recently moved, and which obscure fitting could substitute for another when necessary. Without Clarence, customers wandered the aisles, sometimes for hours, searching and searching. Clarence noticed Marvin immediately. Years of experience had taught him that Marvin never entered the store without an interesting purpose. Other employees recognized this about Marvin as well, but Clarence had first dibs. Whenever Marvin appeared, Clarence quietly claimed responsibility for helping him. Nobody objected. Marvin's projects provided far more stimulation than stocking shelves. Today's project immediately captured Clarence's curiosity. Copper plumbing pipe was familiar territory. Using it as an antenna was not. Within moments, and aboard their scooters, Marvin and Earl were moving through the plumbing department, while Clarence effortlessly gathered materials from opposite sides of the aisle. 5-foot lengths of half-inch copper tubing came first, then fittings, T's, 90-degree elbows, couplings, end caps, flux, solder, emery cloth, a compact tubing cutter. Each item seemed to appear in Clarence's hands almost before Marvin finished checking it against his carefully prepared list. Clarence listened with growing fascination as Marvin described the remarkable history of radio itself. The explanation wandered across decades, but lingered longest on the Citizens Band era before the newer personal radio services emerged. Throughout radio's history, antennas proudly remained among the most important parts of every radio system. The story took considerably longer than the original question probably required, but Clarence was fascinated. While other customers waited with their questions, Clarence purposefully moved to put his back towards them to signal that he was helping Marvin. Several nearby customers paused their shopping just enough to overhear portions of the conversation while pretending to compare plumbing supplies. Even the cashier seemed mildly disappointed that the radio project conversation concluded before Marvin reached the checkout lane. Clarence made Marvin promise to bring the completed antenna into the store when finished so that he could see it. Outside once again, the copper tubing rested securely across Earl's cargo basket. That day, it was ordinary plumbing. By tomorrow, if all went according to Marvin's optimistic plans, it would become something capable of carrying friendly conversations invisibly through the sky. Marvin found that thought remarkably satisfying as Earl drove ahead of Marvin on the way home so that he could see way out in front.